that's it, really. Thank you too much for starting the recording, and let me move to the agenda of today. So in the very beginning, I am going to state a couple of things about the project itself, why we're here actually, who's the organizer, and tell you a little bit more about the aim of the project and our goals. Then we will welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Jan Tuma, who's the head of the emissions trading unit with the Ministry of Environment of the Czech Republic. And just after that, we move directly to the first session about functioning, evolution, and the reform of the EU ETS with 3 sub-blocks, as I said before. Then we'll have 45 minutes, more or less, for discussing, for question and answers, for your comments, and then there'll be break. And in the second part, we'll be looking at how can the EU ETS stimulate the green transition, especially in the environment of high energy prices. We'll be looking at auctioning revenues, their use. Tomáš will say a couple things about modernization and innovation fund. And in the end, I'll be talking about the EU ETS 2, the social and climate fund, and also impacts of this very new ETS that might be created on consumers. Then we'll have some more time to discuss, and we'll wrap it up. If all goes according to the plan, we should be finishing about 1 p.m. So again, let me welcome you here, each and every one of you. I hope still some people will keep joining, but that's fine. And now let me tell you a couple things about the project Life ETX.
I may just jump into it, Jan. Yes, for the sake of just a very brief introduction, it'd be great if every one of you could just write a sentence about what your affiliation is and what you are doing into the chat box, so that we have this sort of a brief introduction without losing time. That'd be great. Thank you.
That's a great idea. Thank you. So if you could, each and every one of you, do that maybe before we'll dive into the session 1, that'd be great. Thank you, Tomáš. So why are we all here, actually? Life ETX, or Life Emissions Trading Extra, is a live project, as the name suggests. The overall goal of the project is really to bring the EU ETS closer to citizens, to civil society and other stakeholders in each of the member states. The project is 3 years long, and there are about 10 NGO partners across the EU. AMO is representing the Czech Republic in this case. The project is focusing on the EU ETS reform and on carbon pricing on both national and the international levels. It is funded by the European Union with 45% of contribution from the European Climate Fund. So what is Life ETX really about? As I said, so the aim of the project is really to build capacity and share knowledge in order to collaborate for change. So we're really trying to build or incite organizations from each of the member states to actively participate on the revision process, for example, and to try to address maybe a lack of understanding about the EU ETS and related themes, maybe a policy bias leading to lack of understanding, or maybe lack of willingness to pass some ambitious reforms. There's also a limited capacity in many member states, so we'd like to, let's say, stir a discussion, and if everyone can participate in the reform, obviously the outcome will be better. So thank you. Tomáš, can you move to the next one? Yes, so here you can see the organizations from the represented member states. We have also one member of the project from Poland, which is why we'd like to dedicate this workshop more to the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary, because there are no organizations in the project from these very member states. So that was for my little introduction about Live ETX and what we'd like to do here in the Czech context. Maybe let me finish.
Jo, ne, v pohodě.
Please mute everyone who's not speaking at the moment. Thank you. So yeah, let me finish by saying that the goal of the project, as I said, is really to build capacity. So if maybe after the project you feel like reaching out, maybe from a partner organization, you'd like to organize more workshop in this theme, we are more than happy to share materials or cooperate with you afterwards. So do not hesitate to reach out. And now, without further ado, let me welcome Mr. Jan Tuma, the head of the emissions trading unit with the Ministry of Environment of the Czech Republic, who shall proceed to the keynote speech and tell us a couple words about his perspective on the EU ETS reform, the current energy crisis and related. So, Mr. Tuma, welcome, and please, if you could tell us a couple words, that'd be great. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me and for the opportunity to discuss the progress of Fit for 55 dossiers. My name is Jan Tuma and I'm head of emission trading unit at the Ministry of Environment of the Czech Republic, and I'm responsible for implementation of the EU ETS in the Czech Republic and the negotiation of the revision of the European legislation. Now, the revision of the EU ETS directive is one of the main parts of the Fit for 55 package. Having negotiated several such revisions before, and they were never easy, I can assure you that those are no match for the scale of what we have before us now. The Commission's proposal is very ambitious. And apart from emission reductions, it aims at securing the competitiveness of the European economy while preventing negative social impacts. Some of the emission reductions are to be achieved by simple adjustment to the parameters of the existing ETS, but there are some very new measures being proposed. One of them is Cban, or Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or Carbon Border Adjustment Measure, which will have great impact on the imports to the European Union and consequently the carbon intensity of industrial production all over the world in countries who wish to export to the European Union. And at the same time, the free allocation of allowances for the sectors concerned in the ETS shall be phased out, which is a source of tension across the EU because some industry representatives are worried that the allocation phase out and the effectiveness are worried about the allocation phase out and the effectiveness of Cban. The industry will naturally like to keep their free allowances, free allocation, but this situation will probably be changed so as not to be in breach of WTO rules. With such a move, the relatively high climate ambitions of the EU materializes and it spreads, sending a clear signal that the EU wants to be climate neutral and that it prefers to do business with climate neutral partners. Another very sensitive issue is the emission trading scheme for road transport and building sector, referred to as BRT ETS or ETS2. This has been very difficult to negotiate, and it is very political because governments are reluctant to let their citizens bear some extra carbon costs, given that Europeans face unprecedented inflation. The Commission proposes to offset the impacts of ETS2 with a social climate fund, which will support low-income households and enterprises and provide financing for low-carbon transport and heating alternatives. So I expect this discussion to continue for some time on the political level. Slowly, the new investments are changing course in the direction of climate neutrality, especially in the power sector. And to further encourage this, instruments like the Modernization Fund or Innovation Fund are crucial. Together with strict state aid rules, they are helping to steer investments in the green direction. And the appetite for the investments, for example, in renewables and energy efficiency are very high, and we are eagerly anticipating the new GBER with the new state aid rules, which will contain rules for investments in hydrogen. This is very important because we are going to need a lot of green electricity and a lot of green hydrogen to supply our industry sectors with green alternatives to fossil fuels. So from this perspective, we welcome the Commission's proposal to increase the Modernization Fund for beneficiary member states by an additional 2.5% of allowances. And naturally, I have to mention what impact on climate policy the Russian aggression might have. War is always a terrible disaster. Moreover, it complicates things and plans, and this is true for the European Green Deal too. Many operators had thought that they would switch from coal to natural gas, but this doesn't seem viable now that the EU needs to eliminate its dependence on fossil fuels imported from Russia and not to be vulnerable to this outside influence. As such, this will probably necessitate sticking with coal for a little longer, but we must strengthen our determination to do without fossil fuels in the long term. We will need to skip a step of our planned transition, but on the other hand, the recent developments have made it clear that quick agreement on the Fit for 55 package is very important and may bring member states on the fast track towards general approach and finally an agreement in trialogues with the European Commission and European Parliament. And this is our aim for the upcoming Czech presidency, to advance the proposals as far and as close to the final agreement as possible. The French presidency is doing a great job. We already have one general approach on the Cban, but we still have some outstanding political topics to deal with, and one of the most complicated is the said ETS2. So I hope we will all be more constructive now that it is clear that quick agreement is necessary. After all, the resulting legislation can provide governments with tools to tackle the threat of negative social impacts and loss of competitiveness of the European economy, as we may have to face them much sooner than we thought. So there is a lot of work ahead of us, but I hope that the Czech Republic will be honored to seal the deal on as many Fit for 55 files as possible during our presidency. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Mr. Tuma, for your keynote speech. That's great also to hear that you mentioned the context, the still undergoing Russian invasion to the Ukraine, and how it's impacting the discussion about the revision on the EU ETS and the Fit for 55 package. I would still maybe leave it to the participants. Should any one of you have a question to Mr. Tuma, maybe now is the good time. Of course, there will be a space for discussion after the session 1, but I'm not sure maybe if Mr. Tuma will be with us after that as well. So if anyone would like to jump in now, I think this is your opportunity. If not, then let me move directly to our first session, which is which will be focusing on the functioning, evolution, and the reform of the EU ETS. And at first, I'll be looking at some of the key elements and challenges that are related to the very functioning of the EU ETS. So firstly, why do we need a price on carbon? Let me really start from this very general view. Of course, there's a need to tax or to put a price on carbon, so to say, because there's a clear market failure that does not address negative externalities that are created by emitting greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, all of the people in a way pay for these externalities in the form of global warming, higher healthcare costs, for example, or maybe damages incurred to them by heat waves, maybe sea level rise, and other phenomena. And putting a price on carbon really helps to shift this burden for the damages back to those who are directly or indirectly responsible for them. There are several paths to putting a price on carbon, with two main instruments being the emission trading systems and carbon taxes. Both of them obviously have their advantages and disadvantages. In the world, there are currently 25 emission trading systems in force, with 9 under development and 14 in consideration, as you can see on this graphic by the International Carbon Action Partnership. Now that we agreed that there is a need to tax or to put a price on carbon, how much should it be, really? That's the question. So one way to handle this is to look at the concept of social cost of carbon, or SCC, which really tries to add up all the costs and benefits of emitting one additional ton of CO2 equivalent. The value of the social cost on carbon vary widely, but the value of $30 as presented by Mr. Nauthaus and Bradbury in their research is probably the widest known. However, latest studies calculate cost of more than 300, so 10 times more. And in the latest IPCC report, for example, the suggested price on carbon is between $135 to $5,000 per ton of CO2 in 2030, and between $245 and $13,000 in 2050 even. The most recent Climate Bank roadmap presented by the European Investment Bank suggested similar figures ranging between 250 euros per ton of CO2 to 800 tons to 800 euros per ton of CO2 in 2050. So now let me move to the EU ETS itself. So as you all know, surely the EU ETS is called a cap and trade system that sets an overall emissions cap. It is a highly regulatory market, meaning that it is very much dependent on its design, on the design that it's set and may be changed over time by policy makers. However, the price of EU allowances, or EUAs, as we call them as well, is in theory, at least to some extent, set by the market. In 2021, the cap was approximately 1.57 billion European emission allowances. And there are actually three main ways to acquire these allowances. So either you can buy them at an auction, which is the primary market for EUAs, or you can receive them for free. There's this concept of free allocation, as mentioned by Mr. Tuma. And thirdly, you can buy them on the open or secondary market. And this is really important because companies can buy and sell allowances if they want to, even though the ones that they receive for free. For example, if one company succeeds in lowering their emissions particularly fast, maybe they included some innovations or some other breakthrough solutions to their processes, they can in this way either spare the allowances in the form that they don't have to surrender them in a specific year, or they can sell them on the market. And this trading element is really one of the biggest advantages of the EU ETS, as opposed to concept of carbon taxes, for example, because this should really enable a cost-efficient decarbonization, meaning that the cheapest emission reductions happen first. And this is exactly why we call the EU ETS a cap and trade system, because one of the key elements is definitely the trading. However, a carbon market is actually unfit to address some non-market barriers, surely. It can be a lack of capital. For example, some market participants don't really have the means to invest in energy-saving solutions. And the EU ETS also fails to develop or foster innovative technologies. Now let me move to the inner workings of the EU ETS. One of them being the linear reduction factor, or LRF. The linear reduction factor is really the rate at which the cap decreases each year. It is a means to force decarbonization on the EU ETS over time. There's a direct link between the LRF and climate ambition, and this is precisely why the rate of or this number is at the center of negotiations around the current reform of the EU ETS. So between 2013 and 2020, the LRF was set at 1.74%, and as of 2021, this is 2.2%. Confusingly enough, this rate is actually expressed in terms of the cap from 2013. So it's not really a percentage as much as an absolute number of EU emission allowances. So at the last phase, this was 34 million EUAs per year, and now, or as of 2021, this is 43 million EUAs. it is clear that changing this rate enormously impacts the carbon budget or the date when the EU ETS should really hit zero. And the impact of the LRF can really be seen at the next slide, where you can see the current legislative trajectory that should finish in EU ETS hitting zero. Hello, welcome, Anna. Please put yourself on mute for the moment. Thank you. That should really hit zero in 2058. Whereas the current Commission proposal in the EU ETS reform with the linear reduction factor of 4.2 hit zero in 2040. And this is obviously a step in the right direction, but there are also organizations or other stakeholders that say that this is an improvement, but still does not go far enough. And for example, the Climate Action Network Europe or CAN suggests that the LRF should be set at 5.4. Thank you, Tomáš. So now let me say a couple words about MSR, which is another crucial part of the inner workings of the EU ETS. The Market Stability Reserve, or MSR, is in a sense a supply control mechanism, and in this way can really limit the number of emission allowances in circulation. Each year, the Commission calculates the total number of allowances in circulation, or Tneck, and according to this number, the MSR either sucks emission allowances from the market, or should there be a lack of allowances, it puts some additional allowances the following year on the market. And at this graph, excuse me, you can see the surplus in the phase 3 that was quite considerable and still is. And it was actually year 2018 when the MSR started functioning, when we could really see that the confidence is returning to the market, and market participants realized that the low EUA price shall not stay there for long. So as I said, every year the Commission calculates the Tneck, or total number of allowances in circulation. So what is this number? Well, it's really the difference between supply and demand. So it is counted as free allocation plus auctioning minus the volume in the MSR and the emissions that have been verified. And well, the MSR then establishes these two thresholds. So if this number is higher than 833 million, there's this sucking up of EUAs from the market. And should this be below 400 million, meaning the policymakers consider that there's a lack of liquidity on the market, there's 100 million allowances that is returning back to the market. What is important is that the surplus allowances in the market are not really held by the European Commission or the member states, but they are usually held by private companies that have purchased them on this secondary market that I mentioned. So the Commission cannot just recall these allowances back in a way. So this is why this taking back from let's say deleting emission allowances from the market is happening on the level of member states, meaning that less and less allowances are actually being auctioned at the level of national auctions. And this is quite crucial because it really reduces the volume of auctioning allowances that are at the disposal of national of the member states. But just one last word. The MSR doesn't just soak up the oversupply, but it also start retiring or deleting, canceling, if you will, EUAs in 2023, meaning that every allowance held in the volume that every allowance held above the volume auctioned the year before is going to be cancelled. And this might really play a huge part in 2023 because as of now, the MSR contains 1.9 billion allowances, but the auctioning volume was only 780 million EUAs. So meaning that if the MSR started working now, we would see a cancelling of almost 1 billion allowances. So this will definitely have a significant impact on the functioning of the market. And we'll probably see, because of that, a decrease in the volume of auctioning allowances for the member states. Now, maybe let me say that the MSR has been successful at supporting the carbon price since it started operating in 2018. The market participants really see that the years of oversupply are beginning to an end. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that the MSR was really built to tackle historic oversupply. And maybe when it comes to current or future shocks, the MSR might not be able to respond as effectively or efficiently. For example, the current national coal phase-out plans could add another 2 billion EUAs to the oversupply between 2021 and 2030. We saw that or related to the COVID pandemic, the price of EUAs also was greatly affected. So MSR really might not be able to react very fast regarding these crises that might come in the future. Now let's look at the historical price evolution. So for all that I mentioned, we see that the EU ETS or the EUA rather price has been quite changing in the last years. This is the evolution of the price in the phase 2. And here we can really see that the EU ETS is a regulatory market and is greatly affected by the current legislation and the policy change. So, for example, around at the beginning of 2014, when the backloading was approved, we can see a steady increase in price. Then the market stability reserve was agreed, and at 2018, there's quite a steady increase as well. Then the COVID-19 pandemic hit, so there's a big drop. But as soon as its impact was over, we were seeing prices like never before, hitting 80 or 90 euros per ton of CO2. And especially when the Fit for 55 package was announced and discussed, the price was hitting record highs yet again. So let me maybe finish with this. And unless there are urgent questions, I'd like to give the floor to Tomáš.
Thank you, Jan. And if you could now share from your computer, that would be perfect. So after this, I think very necessary and hopefully not all that technical, but still very insightful intro, I will move into the issue of carbon leakage and of oversupply of allowances, which is something that's already been partly discussed. It is an issue that's related to also the current arguments that are being used by the industries that are not necessarily very happy with the way that the reform of the EU ETS is taking, and not least in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and the broader Visegrad region. Okay, so perfect. Let's jump right into it then. And let me start with a couple words on the carbon leakage. Carbon leakage is a phenomenon that's been very much discussed in the political sphere and also very much researched at universities, research institutes, in think tanks. What it actually means, it's a phenomenon that describes a shift of production to a place with less stringent climate policies, typically a less stringent carbon market or a non-existent carbon market that might eventually lead to a cumulative increase in greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a phenomenon that the European Commission and the member states are eager to prevent from happening within the EU ETS system. And here at the map on the right side, you can see how it is in terms of the EU member states being emission importers or exporters, so to say. That means how much emissions they are actually having embedded in international trade. You can see that especially most of the Western and Northern European member states are importing a lot of emissions. That means that their emission balance in terms of what they report to the IPCC and to the EU is actually quite significantly lower than what is their actually consumption of emissions, because they import a lot of products. This is not necessarily true in all the Central European states. So Czech Republic is at around 0 and Poland is even in the negative. That is a result of them being quite strong exporters. So this could indicate that the carbon leakage is already a reality, because a lot of production is actually being done outside of the EU, and then products are being imported with a certain emission footprint that is then not attributed to the EU member states. However, being an emission importer does not necessarily imply carbon leakage, because we do not know whether the industries, whether the production has already been there in the countries that are actually now exporting the products. So for instance, if we import electronics from Taiwan, or if we import textile from China, unless this production has previously been done in the EU and then shifted to those countries, I mean, this is not carbon leakage. This is simply an effect of international trade on emissions, but it's not a carbon leakage in itself. So opinions vary as to whether carbon leakage is a reality, whether it's an observed fact, which is something that especially export-heavy industries are eager to state, or whether it is a convenient argument for those who are requesting extra free allowances and a longer transition period, etc. We can conclude from the available studies that so far there is very little evidence for carbon leakage being a reality. And rather than that, I mean, it is something that is somehow mythical. It is a concept that is being used, but it's not necessarily something that we see directly impacting the EU's production industry's competitiveness. Now, the question is how it will be in the future, how it will be in response to the current strongly growing EU ETS prices, etc. But if we take as a baseline the fact that countries all around the world are actually adopting their own ambitious climate targets and setting up their own emission trading systems all across the world, or a carbon tax or an equivalent, then there will simply be fewer and fewer places to relocate to. So this is also an important part of the puzzle. When EU industries are claiming that they will have to move production elsewhere, it might not simply be so easy, and it might be that a couple of years or a couple of decades down the road, I mean, if we are able to create some regional and global equilibrium, I mean, this will really not be an issue at all. So this for the carbon leakage. We can move on now to the issue of oversupply of free allowances, which is linked to that. Because free allowances are actually the tool, the instrument that is being used as a prevention of carbon leakage. However, what we can see is that free allowances also create an uneven playing field. So in phase 3 of the EU ETS, that is 2013 to 2020, actually close to a half of the allowances that were put to circulation were allocated for free. Now, what this means is that instead of creating a real market, I mean, the market is somehow skewed, and the free allocation is then given to the emission intensive industries. So they are actually at the EU carbon leakage list. And an observed fact is that those industries have received more allowances altogether in this phase than they actually needed to cover all of their emissions. So from the graph on the right side, that is by CE Delft, you can see that especially in between 2008 and 2013, so that would be still actually in phase 2, the over-allocation has been a very observed reality, a very real problem. And this led to extra profits of the industries, which should have been protected against carbon leakage, but in the end were actually over-allocated and generated some extra profit from that. Most notably, this was in the sectors of construction materials, so cement, lime, and bricks. If we look at the Central and Eastern European countries, Slovakia was actually the one that benefited the most from this over-allocation of about 200 million euro. Now, this is not the only way in which industries have created profits from, say, holes or deficiencies or loopholes in the system. It is also because they were able to convert international credits under the Kyoto Protocol, which had a much lower market value than the EU ETS for the EU ETS allowances, and thus make also altogether estimate about 3 billion euros profit. So this is for overall allocation, but let's now jump into the other issue, and that is a cost pass-through phenomenon. So what do we mean by this? It is to say that the energy and emission intensive industries are not only benefiting directly from receiving free allowances and from being even over allocated compared to their needs, but that it is in their rational economic behavior that even if they receive a free emission allowance, they are actually still reflecting the price in the final price of the product that they put on the market. So what this means is they pass through the costs effectively to the consumers in any case, regardless of receiving the allocations for free. They might be incentivized to actually sell the free allocated permit on the secondary market with a profit. And in reality, this kind of cost pass-through, which is actually confirmed by several studies, also by WWF and by Carbon Market Watch, it actually implies that the extra profit of the energy intensive industries has been at around 26 to up to 50 billion euro between 2008 and 2019, which is about 10 times more than they would have actually received from the over allocation itself. So on the right side, you can see the scheme of how this is actually working and why this windfall profit is occurring. Most of the profit was now in the iron and steel sectors, followed by refineries. So what I mean to say by this is that there is a certain lack of integrity and potential undermining of the system that is to a large degree dependent on our reliance on the free allocations, which were always a temporary measure and should not actually be more than that. But by now, it's really one of the key political battlegrounds as regards to reform. I don't know if I do have another slide. Yes, I do. Now this is to the Cban. So this links to the question of the free allocation phase out. And we unfortunately do not have time to talk about Cban in detail. I'm happy to tackle it more in the discussion. We have done a study on it right now and we'll be publishing it in 2 weeks' time on Cban impacts in the Visegrad region. Now, what I want to say by this is that the Cban is also an instrument that is, of course, part of the Fit for 55 package. And it is a necessity that for the sectors for which Cban should be introduced, which you can see here, those are 5 sectors. They can be extended by a little bit during the negotiations. So iron and steel, aluminum, cement, electricity, and fertilizers. That means effectively very elementary essential products with the exception of electricity. Those then would require a phase out of free allowances for those sectors. That is just for ensuring the compatibility with WTO, World Trade Organization rules. And this should happen according to the proposal at the latest by 2030. However, the sectors which are eligible for free allowances are actually broader than the sectors that are included in the Cban proposal. So on the right side, you can see, based on Sandberg's analysis, what kind of imports and what is the volume of imports that come to the EU and how much of it is actually the Cban and how much of it, if you look at the middle right side, is actually the other products on the carbon leakage list. So you can see that other products on the carbon leakage list, which are eligible for free allocation, are actually still at least double the size of what is to be covered by Cban. So even if we phase out the free allowances for Cban reasons for Cban sectors, then this leaves us with a lot of sectors that are not covered by this. And the question is, I mean, how do we phase out the free allocation there? So the EU, actually, the Commission proposes to phase out the allocation for those sectors which are less exposed to carbon leakage by 2030. But for those that are still very much exposed, it might keep the allocation up to 2030 and perhaps even beyond that. So this really also is to be seen how the Commission will proceed and what kind of proposals will we see in the future. Now, the Central and Eastern European states have been generally fairly skeptical as regards the Cban proposal, especially requesting a longer transition period. That, in effect, means a longer period of free allocation again, because this is something that the industry requires and wants. And also, it is an issue that is a real issue. If the Cban is actually implemented, now, that means that the market should be set equal between exporters to Europe from their global competitors and the European producers on the intra-EU market. However, this does not necessarily mean that the conditions are the same for those when it comes to EU producers exporting outside, because unless there is a functioning carbon market and a carbon price on those markets, then that means that the EU exporters might be disincentivized and in a unadvantageous position compared to their global competitors. So now, one of the issues that is being discussed, and I second what Mr. Tuma had said. Yes, the French presidency secured a general approach on Cban. However, this approach does not tackle a lot of the issues that are being discussed and a lot of the most political ones. So one of those would be the question of so-called export rebates. That means how to support those sectors that are exporting a lot. For instance, that might be cement out of the EU and also of the Central European states, because simply funding them with other free allocations or providing so-called export rebates is again in violation of WTO rules. So we will have to actually look into what other options are there and whether there are any options except for providing some investment support and grant schemes through funds like the Modernization Fund and Innovation Fund, which we will talk about later on down the road. So this is from me for this initial discussion. I wanted to clarify a little bit where we stand with the free allocation, and also what is the request of the industries, what is the request of the individual member states. I see that Martin posted a question, but I think we still pass on to Jan's final presentation this first session, and then we come to it at the Q&A, if that's fine. So I will take on the screen sharing and pass the spotlight to Jan once again.
Thank you very much, Tomáš. So now we come to the last part of the session 1, which is the outlook of the EU ETS. And in this part, I'd really like to say a couple of words about the reform of the current EU ETS, describe maybe the main elements of this reform, and also set the very reform in context in terms of the Fit for 55 climate package. So firstly, the EU ETS covered approximately half of the greenhouse gas emissions of the European Union in 2013, but this has dropped to only 36% or about 40% in 2020. So just for the beginning, let me say that the share of the emissions covered by the EU ETS changes quite a bit, and it's mainly because the EU ETS sectors are reducing their emissions at a faster rate than the rest of the economy. But let's move to the context now. Mr. Tuma has talked about this one. Mr. Tuma has talked about it already. The wider context of the EU ETS reform is really the European Green Deal and the climate law, which raised the EU's ambition with the reduction target now being at least 55% from the previous 40. And this higher ambition really needs to translate into sectoral targets. And this was precisely why the Commission proposed to raise the EU ETS target to a 61% reduction by 2030. And while this is also, again, a step in the right direction, some other stakeholders suggest that this should be slashed by even higher rate. Again, Can Europe suggests 70% by 2030, with climate neutrality happening actually a decade before the official target by 2040, that is. As said before, the EU ETS is really enshrined in the EU ETS directive that is currently under the revision process, and also needs to be brought in line with this increased ambition. But the Fit for 55 package also includes 15 other legislative files, among others, the Cban just mentioned by Tomáš, the Social Climate Fund, and others. So because it covers around 40% of European emissions, it is definitely a crucial piece of legislation and one of the EU's main instruments to reduce their to reduce the bloc's emissions. Tomáš, can you go on? Thank you. So when the Commission proposed this reform in July of last year, we could see some improvements of elements already present in the current directive, but also some new elements have been introduced. When it comes to the reform itself, there are, I would say, three main topics or maybe themes regarding the reform, which is design, scope, and spending. So when it comes to design, the Commission proposes a one-off reduction of the overall emissions cap of 117 million allowances. This is the so-called rebasing of the cap, and also suggest that the linear reduction factor should be increased to 4.2%, as I mentioned before. Concerning the MSR, so the intake rate of the MSR should really be kept at 24% instead of reducing it to 12%. As it stands now, you remember that I mentioned that the MSR functions in a way that should the threshold of the total allowances in circulation be surpassed, the MSR reacts and takes a certain number of emission allowances from the system. This is really what is represented by this intake rate of 24%. So basically, the rate is twice as significant than it has been until now. The Commission also proposes to, let's say, lay the ground for a more strict system regarding benchmarks. So this is really very much connected to what Tomáš has been talking about now. There's a reward system for the best performers. So let's say you are at the very top of innovation, and you were able to save some of the allowances because of new technology or clean solutions in your processes. And if this is the true, then you would get more allowances as a reward. Whereas when you at the bottom of the benchmark, let's say, you would be penalized and you would be asked to surrender more allowances, in the means that you would get less allowances in terms of free allocation. So the Commission really tries to address this problem of free allocation, as mentioned by Tomáš, but by putting, let's say, more strict rules for allocating them, the EUAs for free. And then lastly, establishing of the Cban is also one of the important, in this case, new elements that the Commission tries to introduce in order to avoid carbon leakage, as Tomáš said in his presentation. When it comes to scope, the EU ETS should be extended to include emissions from the maritime sector, and most importantly, the emissions from the road transport and buildings should be added to the scope of the EU ETS as well. Actually, a new ETS should be created for this purpose. And because many fear social impacts of this very reform, the Commission suggests establishing a social and climate fund to really avoid, for example, energy poverty or more impacts on the most vulnerable households. When it comes to spending, newly, entire proceeds of all auctioning revenues should go on climate action and energy transformation. So this is also something new. Up until now, I'm not sure if I had mentioned that at least 50% of all revenues need to be spent on climate action and energy. So when it comes to timeline, well, the Fit for 55 package was presented in July last year. And according to the estimates, the EU ETS revision should really, or let's say the Parliament and the Council should adopt their revisions by middle of this year. But then the trilogues happen either in summer or autumn. And so it really depends on the lasting of the trilogues. It can be months, it can be sometimes even more than that. So hopefully we would have their position by the beginning of the following year. Now, what I'd like to answer in this part of our workshop is if the project of the EU ETS has really been successful. This is quite an interesting question because it is clear that the EU ETS has been able to reduce emissions, as I already mentioned. But still, it has been under quite some pressure and criticism, mainly due to overallocation, as we saw. Tomáš was talking about windfall profits for market participants. There has been quite some price volatility, so uncertainty for market participants as well. So actually, a lot of criticism, but the aim or the goal of the ETS is really to reduce emissions, and this was a reality, as you can see in the table. The yearly change in EU ETS emissions was negative actually every year apart from 2013. So it is clear that the emissions have been falling considerably. But the problem is that when we look at the inner workings of the system, this is actually not that clear, because the overall reduction in emissions camouflages major differences in sectors. I'll come back to that in a while. What is clear is that electricity and heating sectors are the main, or have been the main reasons why EU ETS was able to decrease emissions over time quite considerably. However, emissions from the industrial sector have been actually stagnant, and emissions from the aviation sector actually increased, with the notable exception of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. On the next slide, you can see that in 2020, the emissions from the aviation sector dropped considerably. Why this actually happened? Well, the main cause of this is that the power sector had to pay for the vast majority of allowances since 2013, but as Tomáš said, the free allocation is really a phenomenon that is persisting in the system for the industrial sector, especially for aviation as well. They receive massive amounts of units for free, and this really results in no real economic incentive for this very sector to decarbonize their operations. So how much is this due to the EU ETS? Well, it is clear that the EU ETS is not the single driver of policy change affecting decarbonization. for example, when it comes to the power sector, it's clear that most of the emission reductions have been due to, let's say, a stronger deployment of renewable energy. So it is a question to what extent the EU ETS has been behind this ramp up. Surely it plays a role, but it's probably not the main driver. Energy market data suggests that by 2020, the EU ETS was behind a fuel switch between coal and dirty gas. But when it comes to renewables, there are other instruments that the EU and member states use to ramp up their capacity of renewable energy. So, well, this is the end of the first session. Thank you very much for listening. And I'd like to now proceed to the Q&A part. It's 10:15, so.
We are right on time and have plenty of time for debate. If we have fewer debaters, then we have more of a break.
So maybe for starters, let's take the question from Martin. Martin asked in the chat, what are the repercussions, or if they are severe enough to influence the behavior of those who are not complying with the market rules? I don't think we mentioned this, so this is, of course, an important question. As of now, I believe the rules are set or designed that anyone who does not comply to the rules, that is, does not surrender the number of emission allowances that are corresponding to the emissions that are emitted by this producer or participant. They have to pay a price of 100 euros per ton of CO2 equivalent.
On top of the price of the allowance.
Exactly, on top of the price of allowance, because if this was not the case, obviously, should the price increase above 100 euros per ton of CO2, this would be to no motivation, let's say. So this is how the rules are as of now. Whether this is sufficient or severe enough, well, that's a question. In my view, or to my knowledge, let's say, I don't think there are many market participants who do not comply. Anytime I looked at the numbers, all the verified emissions, at least from the Czech Republic, have been surrendered for most of the participants. So I don't think this is really happening. But I think that more than the double price for one's emissions, I would say it is motivating rather to be complying with the EU ETS rules.
I'm thinking maybe to pass on still to Mr. Tuma to ask him about his views on this, and whether from the practical point of view, I mean, this is a phenomenon that you've been confronted with, and also, I mean, if this is something that's also tackled in the proposed reform, whether the penalty should increase, etc.
I don't think so. This is not a topic that will be discussed during the negotiations on the ETS revision. I would like to remind that the penalty doesn't lift the obligation to surrender the allowance. So penalty is something on top of the price of the allowance. So from this perspective, I think that that this number is still justified.
Perfect. Do you perhaps have any other comments on what we've been sharing right now? Because of course, I mean, you have a reality check from somebody who is working on those things daily. So any of your insights are very welcome. And also, I mean, let me just once again ask our participants to feel free to raise their hands or ask their questions or comments in the chat box. I think it's worth to have an interactive discussion on this. So yes, any further comments from you, Mr. Tuma? Or not at this point? Okay, perfect. I thought maybe we made some mistakes or wouldn't like to share some fake news.
Yes, also I believe we have a lot of participants from Hungary. In the following session, I'm going to talk a bit more about Hungary and also their revenues from the EU ETS and other topics. But should you have some insights regarding how maybe the reform is accepted in your nation state, in your country, that will be also appreciated. I think looking at the list of participants, there are a lot of experts in the matter, so we are more than happy to be complimented in things we said, and yeah, please feel free to unmute and raise a question or comment.
In case there really are none, we're going to take a long break because we thought of actually sticking to the proposed agenda in terms of being accommodative to people who might be only joining for one of those sessions. So we hoped for discussion, but if we don't have a discussion, then we would actually just a note be starting the second session, and perhaps then Jan, you can just shortly introduce the topics to be covered there at 11:15, if I'm not mistaken. So we would be pausing the recording and taking a break while inviting everybody to stay in the call muted and videos off, and then just reconnecting at the right time. I might actually put in a stop clock if I manage to do so.
That would be just great, Tomáš. Thank you very much. That's very correct. So our next session is called "How the EU ETS can help stimulate the green transition, especially in the environment of high energy prices." So hopefully this topic will stir a more vivid discussion, or maybe some questions from your part. In this session, we're going to be looking at auctioning revenues and their use in the EU and our countries of focus. In the second part, Tomáš will talk about the modernization and the innovation funds, and how they can also help the green transition. And by the end, I'll be looking at the EU ETS 2 more closely, and its impact on consumers. So it's a social impacts of this new ETS, and how it is related to the also one of the files of the Fit for 55 climate package, which is the social and climate fund. And by the end, we also hope to have a discussion, a Q&A session with hopefully a lot of comments from your side, maybe some insights from member countries, etc. Let me also ask Mr. Tuma, will you be with us for the second session as well? Can we count on your participation?
Yes, for a couple of minutes, unless I will be called to another meeting. But so far, I count on my participation.
Thank you very much.
In the meantime, we've gotten a question in the chat box, actually, from Isabella Grundova from the European Commission, that relates to what are the criteria for member states to decide on free allocation to installations. And apparently some national courts have been deciding on the legality of those allocations. Since we have Jan here, I still think we should be able to pass it on to him, because I think you might have a better understanding of how this free allocation is actually made, but I didn't think that it was that much to the decision of the individual member states. It would be a rather transparent system based on the fulfilling of certain criteria set down by the ETS directive and then approved by the Commission, but I may be wrong in that, so I'll be happy to be corrected.
Yes, so thank you for the question, Isabella. I would say partly, Tomáš. So maybe Mr. Tuma can also complement on my comments, but as I understand it, the system is that the member state suggests a list of companies that are eligible to receive free allocation. The so-called national allocation table was a phenomenon that I think it is not anymore in workings, but well, how it worked is that the member states, let's say, enlisted all the participants that are to receive free allocations with precise allocation for each years of each and every phase, and then send the member state would send it to the Commission for approval. I have not seen any national courts deciding on the illegality of it, and having mentioned that that it is the member state itself who decides who of the market participants should receive these free allocations, I wouldn't know how to approach this. So maybe we can have some more insight on this after the break, unless Mr. Tuma would like to say a couple of things regarding the free allocation rules as well.
I think I can answer this question. The free allocation is nothing the member state can decide whether it will be granted or not, because the installations and their operators are entitled for the free allocation. But it's important to bear in mind that the free allocation rules are very complex system, because the industry is very complex, and free allocation rules are designed so that they can apply on the at the scale of the whole economy, and for each and every industrial sector. So imagine that all these sectors will be stuffed in one Excel file. So it's very complicated system. It takes a lot of time, and the basic rule is simple. The free allocation is based on benchmarks, but there is plenty of room for I don't want to say deliberation, but there is plenty of room for interpretation of which industrial process falls under which rule, under which benchmark, how to handle different situations when there is a transfer of one interim product to another ETS installation. It's incredible how difficult the system is working, and how the system of free allocation is capable to cover all these situations. Of course, there are some disputes and legal cases. We have some of them in the Czech Republic too, and sorry, and some of them even reached the Court of Justice of the European Union. And I believe that this is the case for a majority of the member states. We try to coordinate, we try to align our progress, and we try to coordinate also with the European Commission so that our approach is harmonized.
Okay, we have a follow-up question from Barbara. For sectors not covered by Cban, they will be receiving free allowances. Yes, that is correct. By implementing Cban, the problem of free allocation will not disappear completely. The Commission proposes, to my understanding, that those sectors not covered by Cban but not exposed to a high level of carbon leakage risk will be phased out their free allocation from 2026 to 2030. So I would say that by 2030, based on what we've seen in terms of the imports and exports, I mean, perhaps a half of the current free allocations might be already phased out. But for the energy intensive industries that are not covered by CBAM and that still are at risk of carbon leakage, free allocation will stay in place. And then I think it will only become a matter of further negotiations as to whether this also extends beyond 2030. Is that correct?
That is correct, according to the Commission's proposal.
So now you can give us some insights into where the negotiations are moving, unless, of course, this is classified information. But I think just to perhaps know whether there is a incentive, say, from the European Parliament or other actors to actually be more ambitious in terms of the phase out of free allocations.
I'm afraid I can't be very specific. One thing is that we have general approach on the CBAM by the French presidency. That's a good thing because there's a lot of technical issues that have been resolved. So we are glad for that. But this particular thing, the pace of the phase out of the free allocation for CBAM sectors, that hasn't been resolved yet. The general approach or the legislative file on CBAM only refers to the ETS directive, stating that the CBAM obligations will phase in the same pace as the free allocation for CBAM sectors phase out, but the pace of this phasing hasn't been resolved yet, and I believe this is going to be part of the political negotiations and compromise, because there's a lot of sensitive issues in under the ETF file. So there is some opportunity to prepare some balance between them.
Thank you. That's still very useful, I think.
So maybe just to complement on what Mr. Tuma was saying, and maybe just to go back to Isabella's question. If I'm not mistaken, under the current rules, it's exactly as Mr. Tuma has said, which is that all the market participants are obviously complying to the rules set by the Commission. But as I said, it's under the auspices of the member states to create, let's say, a preliminary calculation of the number of free allowances that should go to each installation in their territory, and then send these to, it should be called national implementation measures, that is sent to the Commission, and the Commission after that assesses each of the country's figures, if I'm mistaken. So this was just to clarify.
Perfect. we have any other questions coming up? Should that not be the case, then we have a 40-minute break. So enough for all of your coffees and emails to catch up with. I'll share a screen with a timer, and we will then reconvene here at 11:15. So we'll be looking forward to seeing you back. Please don't log out if you plan to participate. You can just stay in the call with your videos off and muted.
Exactly as Tomasz said. So if you'd like to learn some more about how can the ETS help stimulate the green transition, I'll be talking about auctioning revenues, Tomasz about the modernization and innovation funds. Sorry. And we'll wrap up with the ETS2 and social climate fund. So thank you, everyone, and we'll start again. We'll start at 11:15 in 45 minutes or so.
Welcome back, everybody.
Hello again. So we are back online with the continuation of our workshop. Now we should be looking at how can the EU ETS help stimulate the green transition, especially in the environment of high energy prices. So as I said before, at first I'm going to be looking at auctioning revenues and how are they used in the region, in the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary. Then Tomáš will move to talk about the modernization and the innovation funds. And by the end, I'll move to the EU ETS 2, looking closely to the social and climate fund and the impacts of the additional carbon pricing on consumers. So hopefully you're all here and you could use the break well. I think it's 11:16, so we can probably move to the following subset. Tomáš, what do you think?
I agree. I hope you can see the presentation moving.
Great. Yes, great. Okay, so let's begin then. So at first, I'd like before I move to talk about auctioning revenues, I'd like to say a couple things to put things in perspective regarding the EU ETS or EUA price and its impact on the current energy crisis. Let's say to answer the question, if the EUA price is at the origin of high energy prices that Europe and the world has been experiencing since last autumn. The energy markets have been under pressure since, let's say, last autumn or winter, according to the European Commission. Between 19 and 21, the wholesale price of electricity increased by 230% on average across the EU for power, and for gas prices this was even more significant. The gas prices on the stock exchanges rose by an average of 430%. So what was mainly behind these surges? Well, it was definitely a combination of various factors, but as one of the culprits, I think it's safe to say that higher consumption of energy commodities after the COVID pandemic and the decrease in consumption was one of them. Secondly, another factor was the insufficient filling of gas storage facilities. Normally, in the summer season, when the demand is quite low, the price of gas tends to be lower than in winter in the heating season. And this is why more gas goes to storage so as to fill up storage tanks across Europe at very high levels to be able to use this surplus in winter. But this did not really happen last year for some reason or another. It is I'd like to mention that, for example, Gazprom, who owns about 10% of gas storage capacity in Europe, also did not fill its storage gas tanks across Europe at a normal rate than it used to before. And this is also why Russia has come under pressure and why there have been speculations about market manipulation from its side by many actors. And for example, the European Commission also looked into the matter with unclear results as of now. The energy think tank Amber also provided an analysis regarding the high energy prices and the impact of the emission allowance. For example, they found that between January 21 and September, the price of fossil gas tripled, but the price of the emission allowance was contributing to this effect by only 12 euros, which translates into about 12% of the contribution from the overall 97 euros per megawatt hour for gas increase. So now we can see here the very impact of the EU ETS on the overall push of the price of electricity. We can see that the contribution from the EU the European allowance is not or has not been large, even though by the late 2021 the EUA allowance has been increasing as well. So now let's take a look at auctioning revenues. So what is the main goal of the EU ETS? Well, clearly to reduce emissions, but an important co-benefit is auctioning revenues that, according to the EU ETS directive, are direct proceeds of member states. As such, they represent a great opportunity to finance climate action and support people through the green transition. As I said, auctioning revenues are proceeds of the member states, but at the same time, they are also expected to pool these revenues and finance by at least 50% climate change action or energy transformation. So this is what's expected from member states and recommended by the EU ETS directive. Between 2013 and 2020, the member states raised actually 68 billion euros in revenues through auctioning. In 2021 only, this was about 19 billion. At the table below, we can see the auctioning revenues in selected member states, that is Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. We can see that throughout the 3 years, the auctioning revenues stayed roughly the same. For Czech Republic, they actually increased to some extent. But this was not necessarily the case for member states as a whole, because, as I said, or between 2018 and 2019, the MSR came into the picture, and actually 30% fewer allowances were auctioned between the 2 years, meaning that the MSR was at the origin of less volume available for member states. At the same time, it is clear that the increased price of the EUA allowance, let's say, facilitated the increase or at least stagnation of auctioning revenues for the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. So how are auctioning revenues actually used? On the next slide, we can see that for the Czech Republic, it is the auctioning revenues are divided between the Ministry of Industry and Trade and the Ministry of Environment. So it is 50% for both. The Ministry of Environment uses the revenues through the State Environmental Fund of the Czech Republic to fund energy efficiency programs, while the Ministry of Industry and Trade uses the revenues rather for operational support for renewables. What I'd like to highlight here is the very popular program New Green Savings, which during 2014 and 21 supported 77,000 beneficiaries who were paid a total of 11 billion Czech crowns. The program is very much considered a success, both in the Czech Republic and abroad. However, it needs to be said that the auctioning revenues in the Czech Republic are actually earmarked only to a certain extent because they are capped at 8 billion Czech crowns, meaning that when the auctioning revenues hit or go beyond this very ceiling, the rest of the revenue is just the income of the state budget, as stipulated by the EU ETS directive, and then it is unclear what is happening with this revenue. So for that, there are voices from organizations. This should be changed. As for Slovakia, since 2015, entire proceeds of auctioning revenues are actually the revenue of the environmental fund of the Slovak Republic, which has at its aim to support programs across the environmental landscape. They have programs on reducing pollution, but also waste and wastewater management programs. According to the annual report of the Environmental Fund from 2020, their annual income was about 293 million euros, while the proceeds from emission trading formed about 242 of that, meaning that virtually all auctioning revenue for Slovakia was allocated for this fund. But at the same time, in 2020, the fund's expenditures were budgeted at around 105 million. So it is still unclear what happens with the rest of that money. And so again, as for the case of the Czech Republic, we are also asking the question if the money shouldn't be or couldn't be used for a better purpose, or at least with a increased transparency for the use of the auctioning revenues. For Hungary, I have to admit that I had a hard time researching the use of the auctioning revenues for the member states. But as Czech Republic and Slovakia, Hungary is also allocating a good part of auctioning revenues to energy efficiency programs. I might mention the Warmth of Home program, which relaunched in 2017 with the allocation of 31 billion forints. Until now, the program has also supported energy transformation in about 310,000 Hungarian households. When it comes to reporting, Hungary reports to invest between 50 and 100% of the domestic use of auction revenues to energy efficiency programs, which is rather a general statement. So I'm very happy to take comments or be complimented by the audience. As we saw, between 2013 and 2020, the EU ETS raised 6 to 8 billion euros in revenues. But at the same time, this could have been much higher because about 54 billion euros were foregone due to free allocation, at least according to the WWF. According to the same body, at least 7 member states also did not comply with the recommendation of spending at least half of the auctioning revenues for energy and climate action or purposes. What is more, some member states, among them Slovakia as well, even spent less than 20% of the auctioning revenues on climate action. And here, I'd like to stop for a bit because I just told you a while ago that Slovakia allocated all of its money to the Environment Fund. So how is it possible that the WWF is saying that they spent less than 20%? Well, this is really the trouble of reporting. because the Commission works only with the data that are being that the member states give it, and it is rather vague and opaque, of rather low quality. So it is questionable to what extent these are reliable. This really calls for an independent review, because some member states also tend to leave the template for reporting empty, meaning that there is no back check for anyone else to say whether the proceeds of the EU ETS actions were actually used for climate action. So what are the issues? Definitely vague reporting, no independent review. Well, and lastly, some proceeds are actually even spent against climate action. WWF, for example, highlights that Germany and Belgium spent 7% and 9% respectively on subsidy schemes for indirect cost compensations, while Hungary and Poland spent 25 and 11 million euros respectively to fund fossil fuel heating systems. So it is clear that EU ETS revenues would be better spent if they were transparently earmarked and allocated to specific climate project. So lastly, we can look at this graph also by the WWF and the same analysis that I mentioned. And we can see that the amount of foregone revenue, or the revenue that that could be generated by selling the emission allowances that are going for free allocation, are actually very high. And across the EU, if we took all the member states together, this is almost the same figure as the number or as the total revenue that member states are actually receiving from the sales of EUAs. Thank you, Tomáš. Yes, so this is for auctioning revenues. As I said, it would be great if maybe some of our Hungarian colleagues can say a bit more about how the auctioning revenues are spent in Hungary, if they are still with us. And now I'd like to give the floor to Tomáš, and he'll talk about modernization and the innovation funds.
Thank you, Jan. So if Hungarian colleagues are not eager to respond to your call directly, then I will follow up and kindly ask you to share the presentation from your screen now. So what I want to briefly touch upon is something that many of you are surely acquainted with, but is an integral part of the debates of the use of revenues from the EU ETS. And that is the two funds that we're creating during the last round of reforms, that is the modernization and the innovation funds, as instrument for funding the green transition. So let me start with the modernization fund, which is also the one of higher relevance to the region, and give you an overview of what the instrument actually is, how it functions, and how it is funded. So the objective of the fund is the support of low-income member states in their low-carbon transition. Now, by low income, I think the benchmark was set at GDP of 60% EU average at a certain point. In reality, we have 10 countries which have gone through, mostly the so-called new member states from Central, Eastern, and Southern Eastern Europe. And the instrument is directly linked to EU ETS revenues. So what happens is, unlike what Jan has been talking about in terms of auctions and revenues on the national level and their distribution therein, the modernization fund is then actually created out of a total auctioning revenue on the EU level. That would be 2% in phase 4. That is 2021 until 2030. So 2% of all the allowances that are auctioned in the EU in these 10 years are then linked and channeled to the modernization fund. Now, modernization fund actually then is set up in each of those countries somehow separately. Each of the countries actually runs its own schemes and projects, but these are all very much controlled and verified by the European Investment Bank and the European Commission. So those institutions are fully involved in this. At least 70% of the funding has to go to priority projects. These include the electricity generation and use from renewable sources, improvement of energy efficiency, energy storage, and also modernization of energy networks, and a support for just transition in carbon-dependent regions. So this means that not only the Just Transition Fund should be an instrument of just transition, but also the other funding instruments, such as the Modernization Fund, which is actually the biggest of them all. Now, if we look at the scheme on the right side, and we haven't said that, but we'll be happy to share the presentation afterwards, so feel free to go through it whenever you have the time. It's just a scheme that shows you what is the process, what is the procedure in terms of a member state actually being able to disburse the fund. So first, a member state comes in with an investment proposal, with a scheme or a sub-scheme. Then the EIB should be confirming whether it's priority, whether it falls into those 4 categories or not. If it is a priority investment, then it goes directly to the Commission to take a decision. If not, then it's assessed by the investment bank and it has to be put to a vote. That is because a non-priority investment can involve, for instance, an investment into fossil fuel infrastructure, into gas projects, or other projects that might actually be problematic. Also, there is an importance of adhering to state aid rules under the European legislation. So then after this is actually gone through, the European Investment Bank disburses the funds. And these funds are, to my understanding, dispersed on a biannual basis. I think, well, actually, no, it's once a year or twice a year, based on the member states actually submitting their schemes for funding. So if you want to find more information on the fund, I very much invite you to actually look at the website modernizationfund.eu, which is run by the European Commission. It's actually a very well set up website for navigation, but we can follow up now and look into how much money is there and for whom. Now, all of those 10 countries that are eligible, you can see that the shares of the funding differ quite substantially. In this table, just for the clarity, I distinguished the direct EU funding and domestic transfers. So whatever is marked in red is actually what the member states receive from the EU. And this is not in absolute numbers in terms of funds, in terms of euros, but all is in the number of allowances that are to be auctioned. So the problem with the fund is we never know how much money is there, because it's all dependent to the market forces that are setting the price of the EU ETS or EUA. Now, if you look at it, a couple countries are clearly having a vast majority of the funds or receiving those. That is primarily Poland, followed by Czechia, Romania, and Slovakia. Those 3 together combined have almost 90% of the funds. But you can also look at the right side and see that for some countries, such as the Czech Republic, actually the transfers that are made based on domestic decisions are even higher than the initial share of the fund set by the Commission. So for instance, in Czech case, that will be transferring funds transferring allowances from a free allocation to emission-intensive energy producers to the modernization fund, or it can also involve, such as in the Romanian, Slovak, and Czech case, transfers from solidarity clause that is also included in the ETS directive, helping some poorer member states. So the eventual size of the funds differs quite substantially, country to country, and it depends on whether they decide domestically, as we have in the Czech Republic, that they want to actually include also their free allocations for energy producers and solidarity allowances or not, and based on that, then is calculated the overall allocation for the fund. Now, the problem with this is that the number of allowances actually set for the funds is going to be changing based on the EU ETS revision. Because if we set up a more ambitious decarbonization trajectory and a more ambitious linear reduction factor, as explained by Jan earlier today, then what this means is that the share of the funding, share of the allowances, 2% of the overall auctions is going to decrease as well. So this means that we can see if this reform passes through, there might be a cut in the overall allowances in circulation for the use of the fund by, say, 10 to 20%. Then again, it is a reality that once this fund was set up, the price of an EUA allowance was at around 25 to 30 euros. By now we know, I mean, it's attacking 100, it's now hovering probably around 80 euros per ton per allowance. So the size is actually much bigger than initially estimated. So even if some of the allowances actually disappear from the fund, it still is a reality that the size of the fund in terms of money, in terms of funding, is going to be much higher than initially expected. Next slide, please. Now, I want to just touch upon some of the other changes that are involved in the revised ETS directive. So the revised directive actually proposes to increase the size of the fund and let in additional funding of 2.5% allowances auctioned in the period 2026 to 2030, so second half of this decade. This was also entail the inclusion of other eligible countries, namely Greece and Portugal. And on the graph on the right side, you can see what should be their share of this 2.5% of EUAs auctions in the given period. So not that much for Greece and Portugal, just under 10% for each. Still, Poland and Czechia, and followed by Romania, are the biggest recipients of the funds. For reasons that I stated in this previous slide, this might not necessarily mean and result in an increased number of EUAs in the fund itself, because in the original fund, the number of allowances will be reduced. Then it will be complemented by an increase in this proposed reform. So altogether, countries like Czechia or Poland might be pretty much on par with what was initially proposed, or receive a couple 100,000 perhaps allowances extra, but probably not more than that. What is important, however, is that the conditions change. And if the conditions change as proposed by the Commission, then this means a qualitative shift in how we think about the fund. Because for now, fossil fuel investment was not fully prohibited. So you could actually fund as non-private investments, for instance, the shift from coal heating to gas fuel heating. Therefore also, increase the risk of fossil and carbon lock-in. With the proposed changes, this would not be possible anymore. And this is also important of course, in light of the Russian aggression on Ukraine, because gas is not going to be a very supported source in the coming years, presumably. And I don't see modernization fund funding any of those gas projects that were initially conceptualized, especially by the Central and Eastern European countries. So it will really be a stringent non-fossil policy. Also linked to that is the proposed increased share of priority investments from 70% to 80%. So the four topics, the four focus areas that I mentioned earlier will really be the bulk of the funding set by the Modernization Fund in the future, if the proposed revision passes through. We can then, in the Q&As, discuss more about what is actually funded and how does it work. I mean, it really depends country from country because the governance of the fund is very much linked to how the authority set it up and how participative the process is, etc. We have quite some experience with this from Czechia, and we know that it's been suboptimal, but we also know that in other countries it's been even worse than that. So we are quite critical as to how the fund is set up. However, fact of the matter is already calls are being published and already projects are starting to be funded. And of course, I mean, this is a comparably slow instrument. If we take it, for instance, vis-a-vis the national recovery plans, these are money that needs to be spent in the upcoming 3, 4, 5 years. With the modernization fund, I mean, it can be used in the coming 10 years, so still some time to go. And now I want to spend a word or two on the Innovation Fund, which is much less discussed in the Central and Eastern European context. It's also a smaller fund comparably. So as it was set up, the size of the fund is 450 million allowances for 2021 to 2030. Now, for comparison, the Czech Modernization Fund in itself is around or up to 200 million allowances. So it's not really that huge, and it should fund basically groundbreaking, transformative, low carbon projects and technologies. 400 million allowances 2021 to 2030. Initially, it was thought this means 10 billion euros, but that was back when the price was much lower than now, because at this point we can foresee this being up to 30, 40 or 50 billion euros altogether. The focus of the Innovation Fund is on highly innovative technologies, on big flagship projects, on innovative low carbon solutions, and also it has an important aim on smaller scale projects with significant potential for emissions reduction. The funding is up to 60% of the total cost of innovation, which has to be perceived as an extra cost incurred on the normal operation of, say, an industrial producer or of an energy company. And if we look at the map, and this is just an indicative thing because it's applications to the first Innovation Fund call. Since there have been more of them happening, both for large scale and small scale projects, but the picture stays the same. We can see that there is an East-West divide in Europe. And while Western countries have a lot of applicants and Northern countries a lot of applicants for funding from the Innovation Fund, this is not the case for Central and Eastern European countries, which are mostly relying on the Modernization Fund and other sources of funding, such as operational programs, such as the Just Transition Fund, etc. But this also links, of course, to the level of scientific and innovation excellence that is present in the countries. And there is, in reality, an East and West divide as regards that. So, for instance, here you can see that that most of the applications have actually been filed by Germany, France, and Spain. A lot of them also by the Benelux countries, by the Nordics, less so by Poland, Czechia, and even fewer by countries like Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. If we look at the results, it's actually similar. There are few projects, especially few large-scale projects taking place in the Central Eastern European region, and most of them really go to Northern and Western Europe. Now, it's, I think, also interesting to look at the distribution per technology or per aim of these applications. So from the first call, most of the applications came from energy-intensive industries that proposed some groundbreaking changes to their technologies, such as fuel switch, etc. You can see that a quarter included hydrogen technologies. A large portion also involved the development of renewable energy sources, but also linked to that was storage. So energy storage is really, I think, one of the issues that is being tackled on by industrial players and big energy companies, and that might be receiving quite some funding from this instrument. Last but not least, it's the question of carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture and storage and utilization. So in some places, stakeholders and business actors are trying to make a case for setting up a market or for setting up a business value chain that would actually involve capturing carbon emissions directly or at the production site, and then marketing them further. More information on the fund can be seen at euinnovationfund.eu. That's actually a website that's not run by the Commission, but by a private company, but I still think it's the best source of information. So if you want to see about the new calls and, for instance, who applied from your country, so whether any projects are funded by the Innovation Fund, which also gives you an indication whether there is some groundbreaking research and development in your country, please refer to this website and look at the different calls. So this is from my side now, is regards to Modernization and Innovation Funds. Yes?
Sorry if I may jump in. Would you be able to state some of the projects that have been funded by the Innovation Fund in the Czech Republic, for example?
So as I noted, I think in the Czech Republic, it was like a single project so far. So for instance, large projects, they would select, say, 6 or 7 per call that receive full funding, and they would then select like another 15 that they would help with development. So I think there were no big projects that are actually receiving funding from the first call in Central and Eastern Europe. I know there is a hydrogen project in Poland that might be a smaller scale project, which I think is linked to 7.5 million euros capex expenditures. That is considered a smaller project. In Czechia, I think there was like a photovoltaic / energy storage project under development. But I have to say, I didn't look at the details. I didn't look at the concrete projects. And of course, I mean, in some instances, it can be a foreign investor that is also developing a project elsewhere. I'm sure there were some more projects in Croatia, perhaps also because you would have funding for projects that would, for instance, involve the use of tidal waves, of sea energy. Also, I know that in Finland, this is under consideration. I know that, for instance, Helsinki are developing their district heating system based on the use of sea power. And I think this might actually have received funding from the Innovation Fund as well. But don't take my word. I mean, this is just anecdotal, and please look into the projects yourself.
Thank you very much, Tomáš, for your insights on the modernization and the innovation funds. And now we look at the very last of our subsections. We are right on time for me to talk about the EU ETS 2, the Social and Climate Fund, and about the related impact of carbon pricing on consumers. So one of the most important reforms of the European Commission is really to extend the scope of the EU carbon trading to buildings, road transport, and the maritime sector, as I stated before. Unlike for the industry sector, this new established ETS, or ETS2, as it's called, is to be run under full auctioning. It should be set up by 2025 with market participants to surrender their allowances by 2026. Also, under the current Commission proposal, member states would retain full proceeds from auctioning the European allowances, but at the same time, 100% of the proceeds are to fund energy and climate related activities. So what is the goal of the EU ETS2? So it's really to reduce the emissions from the two sectors, and that is by 42% by 2030 compared to 2005. The amount of allowances to be issued annually will be also accordingly reduced, and that is between 5.15% and 5.45%. So the linear reduction factor should be changed, and between 2026 and 2028, this will be the smaller amount, and between 2028 and 2030, this will rise to 5.43. So what is the reasoning behind the EU ETS2? Well, I talked about it a little bit before. It's rather simple. As mentioned, emissions from the EU ETS as a whole have been decreasing. So there's this assumption that the system is actually working and that the emissions are being decreased, hopefully in an efficient manner. But if you look more closely to the sectorial view, emissions from the road transport and the industry, as apparent, on this graph you can see the emissions from road transport and buildings. We can see that they have been rather stagnating, but for the industry, it's the same sort of picture. Also, road transportation accounted for around 20% of EU emissions in 2021, and buildings about 17%. So now I'd like to move to social impacts of the proposed reform. Many are actually dubious about the inclusion of the transport and the building sectors to the ETS, as both are directly consumer-facing, and many fear that they could actually worsen the energy poverty that has been actually exacerbated by the current energy crisis and the high prices on the European and the world's energy markets. In fact, low-income households spend the highest proportion of their income on heating and transport. So in a way, this is also unjust, because many households might not be able to afford the technology shift towards low carbon solutions because of high capital costs that are usually needed to fund climate or low carbon solutions. A study by Cambridge Econometrics concluded that the system might also actually fail to reach the 43% emission reduction target because of inelastic demand for both transport and heating. This means that people actually need to be moving around, and they need to heat their homes. So this means that even with additional carbon taxation, they would stay relatively unresponsive to the price of carbon, and the demand would actually not move by such a large margin. Moreover, widening the single ETS cap to include transport and buildings might also push up average spending on gas-fueled household heating by 30%, according to Cambridge econometrics. And for the cost of fueling a fossil fuel vehicle, which are still, there's still a majority of them on the market, this might be a push-up of 16% in 2030. So it is rather clear that for at least for disadvantaged households, the revenues should be recycled back, and it seems that the European Commission is also aware of this delicacy, because according to the draft proposal, at least 50% of the revenue generated from this new ETS should be redistributed to low-income households. Now, the Social and Climate Fund is really designed to counter these additional costs that are associated with the EU ETS2 and the sectorial extension. And the Social and Climate Fund is also part of the Fit for 55 climate package. So now a couple of words about this new fund. Well, overall, the budget of the fund for the period between 2025 and 2032 should be 72 billion, and it is to be paid for mainly by the credits in the new EU ETS. The funds will need to be matched by equivalent social climate funding from member states as well, by the same amount that will actually match up the contribution from the European Union. Also, the member states will need to prepare social and climate plans. So this will be the same logic as with the excuse me, the RRF facility. So actually, member states needed to prepare plans so as to how they are planning to spend the money. So this goes in the very same logic, and member states will need to submit social and climate plans to the Commission that is to approve them. So the objectives of the plan of the Social and Climate Fund are clear. The fund is really to support European citizens to offset some of the impact that higher energy bills have had and other unfair impacts. The Social and Climate Fund includes direct income support. So this means a direct compensation for citizens, but also increase energy efficiency in buildings. So both the compensation and the investment incentive is present in the current proposal. So this actually leads me to point that some believe that this forms a contradiction because as part of the money from the ETS2 is to be compensated by the Social and Climate Fund. So some argue that more support should be directed to renewables and energy efficiency measures rather than only compensating effects of high energy prices that are actually just fostering more fossil fuel uses. But this is a question for any one of us to ask ourselves. For the end, I'd like to say that it is still unclear whether both the EU ETS2 and the Social and Climate Fund will be actually approved because of quite a let's say many member states think that the social impacts of the newly established ETS will be great, And also what needs to be said is that Social and Climate Fund goes hand in hand with the ETS2, and it's rather without a question that it will be introduced without the introduction of the EU ETS2. So that was for the conclusion. And now again, I believe we have more than enough time to discuss many questions. We brushed up on many different topics today. Earlier today, I asked our Hungarian colleagues to maybe say a couple words about the auctioning and the use of revenues in Hungary. So if some of them are still with us, please feel free to raise your hand and bring a more topical information for that. Otherwise, we're happy to take any other questions before our wrapping up and concluding. By the end, I will also tell you a couple of things about the follow-up, because we'd be really happy to continue steering the discussion in the Czech Republic and the region. So I'll have some more information about that. And by the end, we'd be also happy to hear some feedback from you. Maybe what would you like to hear from us in the future, if there are topics that you are particularly interested in or like to learn more about in the future. That's of course very much appreciated as well. But now, as for the discussion, any questions from your side? If not, maybe, okay, there's a question from Isabella. So Isabella would like to hear more about the perspective of the Environment Ministry and whether there are intentions of changing the cap for ETS revenues, earmarking perhaps the percentage cap considering the fluctuating prices. Well, I think we would like to hear that too. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if there are any representatives. Great, Mr. Tuma has just appeared. So either Tamas, you can say a couple words, or we can directly ask Mr. Tuma for his insights towards the desired change in the legislation. Mr. Tuma, can you please share your insights with us?
Yep, I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. If the question aims at some link of the revenues earmarking and fluctuating prices, I'm not sure about that.
So earlier in the presentation, I mentioned that the revenues from the EU ETS is actually capped at the current legislation at 8 billion Czech crowns. And so I think this relates directly to that, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, okay, Isabella concords. So whether this is to be changed, whether the cap for ETS revenues, at least the earmarked ones, are to be increased or not, or if you have any information about that. Because I think prior to, I think 2018, this was actually 12 billion Czech crowns.
Correct. 2020. But I think the question is actually relating to whether this might be also put in the legislation in relative terms, say in percentage, a percentage of the revenue rather than absolute terms, because of course, with the fluctuating market price, I mean, the annual revenues change quite dramatically. So whether it wouldn't be a better idea to say that it's 50% or 60% of the revenue going to, say, the State Environment Fund and the Ministry of Industry and Trade for compensation for renewables or other uses, rather than actually having a flat cap of 8 billion.
All right, now I understand. Thank you for clarification. I would like to remind the fact that the Czech Emission Trading Act states that there is a cap on ETS revenues earmarking. That's the 8 billion Czech crowns, but it states that the cap would be higher in case that the auctioning revenues would be so high that this cap of 8 billion Czech crowns will not be sufficient to fulfill the minimum requirements stemming from the European directive, right? So if the 8 billion Czech crowns would be enough to meet the European requirements, then it still is 8 billion Czech crowns. But in case that the ETS revenues would increase dramatically due to increased carbon price, then the earmarked revenues would also increase, so that at least the minimum percentage as defined in the European directive would be fulfilled. It's I admit that it's not very well-written legislation. It might be confusing, but let me remind you that this text was a result of a very difficult political compromise. And I still believe that the best thing we could do to assure that the ETS revenues are earmarked and used for climate-related purposes is to move this auctioning revenues to the modernization fund, because that is the best assurance we can have that these auctioning that these revenues, these allowances, are used for support of renewable sources of energy, energy storage, energy efficiency measures, and similar stuff leading to emission reductions.
I'll actually follow up with 2 remarks, and perhaps then, I mean, we can still have some debate on this. But I think, I mean, the situation that you mentioned in terms of revenues actually exceeding 16 billion crowns per year, I mean, that's not hypothetical anymore. This is a reality in the current years. So in the past 2 years, that's definitely been an observed reality. But what has not been an observed reality is that the earmarked allocation would exceed 8 billion. So what we are seeing now is that the EU Emission Trading Act is actually not being upheld in the Czech context, and the revenue is being instead channeled to the government budget without a specific earmark, which is of course a problem. And then maybe to the second point, of course, modernization fund is the instrument that will be happily taking some extra funds, and of course is the instrument with potentially a large decarbonization opportunities. But I think it does not necessarily cover the issue of the social impact and of really helping out individual households. So in this sense, I think actually boosting up the funding for the Green New Savings Program, which is funded through the Czech Environment Fund via the emission trading, I mean, is a very viable way forward, because we know that if we want to actually meet our targets in terms of energy efficiency, and also if we want to actually do the fuel switch, which will be necessary in terms of household heating, we will probably need to double to triple the funds that are available in this instrument. So I think modernization fund makes sense, but at the same time, it is an instrument that's already been quite inflated with funding thanks to the increase in price of the EU ETS. Potentially channeling more money and finding ways for, of course, an absorption capacity to make use of this money, including project support, etc., and including schemes for low-income households in the new green savings program and similar programs, I think is also an important part of the answer.
If I can comment on that, the first part of what you just said, Tomáši, is correct. That means that the problem is not in the legislation, which is written sufficiently, but the problem is that this legislation is sometimes not adhered to. And the second thing on the program Green Light to Savings, it's true that this program is supposed to be financed by the auctioning revenues, but this hasn't materialized for reasons that that goes beyond my understanding. This program could be financed either from the auctioning revenues, but it could also be financed from the modernization fund if the modernization fund would be strengthened and in a way that more allowances would be sent from the auctioning pot to, or from the revenue spot to the modernization fund pot, because that's the way how to ensure that these revenues will be used for these measures. And you also mentioned some measures for preventing negative social impacts. That is also very important, but I'm not persuaded that Green Lights for Savings or any measure which aims at investment is the correct social response, because we must remember that there is a lot of people, a lot of social groups which simply cannot gather enough funds to implement any investments, not even with some percentage of funding from ETS revenues or from modernization fund. So that's why I think that the Social Climate Fund can fulfill this role and can complement all the other programs which provide the investment support, so that together these measures can help steer the investments on one side and provide some social transfer to social groups which are in a more difficult position and not in place to implement investments.
Let me respond very quickly and then pass on. I think Jan will have some comments as well, but I just want to say that in terms of alleviating the social difficulties, I mean, this has two sides really. And one of them is compensating extra costs in some direct way. And we have some thoughts on that. But the other way is to find a way to actually fund this investment. And it also relates to the conditions that are linked to the different funds. So right now we know that in the operational program environment, we do have a funding scheme for low-income households up to 90% upfront investment for a change of heating source. This could actually be extended to the new green savings program in terms of, first of all, increasing the percentage of funding for low-income households, and also ensuring that is upfront funding, not funded ex post. Plus, of course, this would be necessarily a part of the debate, also ensuring some sort of project support, because we know that for many people, the renovation of a house is not necessarily just a question of money, but also the social capital might be lacking. The ability to actually create the project is a complication. But if we want to actually meet the targets, we know that we actually also need to work with those hundreds of thousands of low-income households that are also currently now being faced with the high energy prices. So in the long run, implementing such projects, it's good for the climate, it's good for the economy, and it's good for the households themselves. Sorry for this. I think Jan might have something to complement.
Don't be sorry, Tomáš. I think we're all happy to have a discussion. Thank you, Mr. Tuma, as well for your insights. I just wanted to compliment the fact that the Social and Climate Fund is really to be set up only in case the EU ETS 2 is to be introduced, and the social impacts are there actually now, as we could see last year and this year as well. The high energy prices are impacting households actually as we speak. Only in the Czech Republic, I think it was 1 million households who had to switch supplier. So I think we also have to try to find ways how to support them and how to try to offset the negative impacts from carbon pricing and the current high energy prices today, and not only from funds to come. I also wanted to say that I put to the chat box 2 links for 2 of our fact sheets that we created with Tomáš. Unfortunately, it's only for Czech speakers, but we are happy to provide insights for anyone who will reach out. And the first fact sheet concerns the auctioning revenues. So you can see the amount of auctioning revenues for the Czech Republic between 2013 and 2020. Whereas the second fact sheet is really looking at one of the potential solutions to adverse impacts of carbon pricing and high energy prices, which is a direct support to households or the climate dividend, as it is sometimes called. So please feel free to look at it as well, and we're happy to provide some more insights upon request. Also, thank you, Isabella, for your question. Are there any other topics that you would like to us maybe to go through or to touch upon?
Any comments from our Hungarian colleagues?
Yes, that would
none
be
heard so far.
Appreciated as well.
So we have another question in the chat box, whether there are alternatives to ETS2 and the Social Climate Fund for regulating emissions in road transport and buildings. The answer is the ETS2 does not replace the existing regulations. So all of those sectors would actually still be falling under the national targets under the effort sharing regulation. So this would stay in place. And basically what the ETS2 does is it helps national governments meet those targets by using this, by implementing this this market mechanism. So even without the ETS2 and without the Social Climate Fund, the target will be in place, and it will be up to the member states how to actually to find ways, to explore ways to achieve them. I don't know if there are any other alternatives on the table, I have to say.
Yes, as Tomáš says, Mr. Tuma, you'd like to say a couple words? No. So
maybe you would say that, but I wanted to say that there are alternatives, and those alternatives are the direct regulation, I mean the directive stop of production of combustion engines, and regulation on the energy performance of buildings, for example. Like these direct regulations are there as an alternative, but at the same time, these are rather more efficient, but also much more expensive than the emission trading. This has been proved before, and this is the reason why the European Union chose the emission trading scheme to be the main tool for decarbonization, because it leads to fulfillment of the decarbonization targets with the lowest cost.
Yes, indeed. Let me maybe say a couple more things in addition to that. So, for example, in Germany for this year, and in Austria as of July 2022, there will be an additional carbon tax introduced. So this is definitely also one of the alternatives to the additional carbon taxation in the form of the EU ETS 2. As Tomáš rightly said, the targets for the emission reduction in the ETS 2 are based on the current legislation. Yes, so there are certain member states that are actually voluntarily opting to put a higher price on carbon. This has been the case since a long time. Actually, even before the EU ETS 1 was introduced, the EU was discussing the possibility of introducing a carbon tax rather than the EU ETS. And some countries like Holland, like Sweden, and now as well Austria is introducing this in addition. And for example, in the case of Austria, who is really doing this at the same time as they're reforming their tax system, they are really trying to achieve this as a transition towards the ETS 2. So the question is whether this will go through at all or not. In any case, because of the additional carbon taxation that will be incurred on Austrian consumers, they are also introducing a climate bonus. So this is also a sort of direct contribution to households, and each and every one of Austrian citizens will be receiving between 100 and 200 euros per person, depending on where they live. So for example, in Vienna, because it is rather a metropolis, they will be receiving less because of accessibility to public transportation. But in the case of rural areas, this will be increasing progressively. So someone who really does not have the means to use public transportation, but really has to use their car, they will have more funds allocated to them because of, let's say, a disproportionate cost burden that is incurred to them because of, as I said, the inelasticity of the demand for the use of their cars. So this was also just to comment, as Mr. Tuma said, there are quite some alternatives to the ETS. Yes, we welcome. You're welcome.
Mr. Zoltan is speaking up. Yes.
Oh, that's true. Welcome, Mr. Zoltan.
Yeah, I am from Hungary, but generally I am the president of Hungarian Industrial Energy Consumer Association. And I am not take part in your programs, but I listened to most of the parts of today's presentations and discussions. I have only one comment maybe, or regard just now, especially in Hungary, industry, especially the energy intensive industry, have a very difficult time about the prices. And just now is as the main question about the survive the industry and all of the additional costs and all of this very high price of the CO2 emission. And altogether, if we cannot be survive this period, then it's very difficult to talk about that, how we can be follow up these decarbonization strong programs or maybe serious programs. I understand this is not, maybe this is the politician question in the future, but I think in 1 or 2 years, we will have a very, very serious economical problems about how functioning the industry. In Hungary, we don't have the indirect compensation of CO2 costs and so on. And unfortunately, we just try to find out how we can relax a little bit about the taxation and tax charge about the industry. And altogether, I don't want to disturb your very important work about the future, but you have to be careful about the next 1 or 2 years. I'm afraid of for industry will have the more important task to survive the life. Sorry that that's a little bit maybe not very good comment, but this is a reality. And unfortunately, the government in Hungary use these sources, which comes from the ETS, is use their own programs about maybe the smaller social parts, but generally just the major question once again that how we can be survive this period. And I hope that this war is around us and these natural gas problems will close, but cannot be destabilize the situation. I'm afraid of minimum 1 or 2 years next one. And this is the key question. You mentioned several times on Hungarians, but I don't know who is take part in these programs and they not do the comments. Unfortunately, I can negative comments, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Zoltan. Your contribution was very much welcome. Thank you for putting on your camera as well. We're happy that you contributed with your take on the costs for Hungarian industry. It's interesting because from my sources, Hungary was actually subsidizing some parts of the Hungarian industry with compensation for indirect costs. I think I found a figure for last year. It was in terms of tens of millions of euros. So I'd be just happy to see where the truth lies then. But I'm sure that you might have much better insights to the topic than myself. Thank you really very much also for your take on the current on the way that the current Russian invasion to Ukraine is affecting all of us actually, and I think the price of gas also will be a significant burden for many countries, not only Central and Eastern Europe, but also other countries in the future. I think this is why we all, or the nation states and the EU should be really striving to find solutions, how to find different suppliers, and how to be able to find other sources for gas other than the one from Russia. So really, thank you very much for your contribution. This was very much appreciated. Is there anyone else who would like to contribute with their comments or analytical point of view? That we also appreciate it. Yes, I think, yes, as I see, the number of participants has also slightly decreased as opposed to the beginning of the presentation. Mr. Tneck, would you like to add some more comments? I'm not sure if you're raising your hand. I think so.
No, thanks. It's not that.
Okay.
So then I think we conclude with some outlook of the next steps of the project. And of course, we will be sharing with you the presentation, and if we decide and find a way to publish the recording, then also the recording.
As Tomáš rightly said, so maybe just a couple words for the conclusion. For the end, I'd like to say that the EU ETS is really not an end in itself, but rather a means to an end. The goal of the emission trading systems, be it the European one or some other, and an end of the new EU ETS that might be established in the future. Their main goals is really just to reduce emissions and really help fulfill the climate targets that are set up by the Paris Agreement, the European Green Deal, and other legislation. But this will not help without, I think, the support of wider stakeholders, wider audience. I think that especially, as Mr. Zoltányi said, the current Russian invasion to Ukraine and high energy prices are affecting everyone. So this is not really helping. At the same time, I think this might be used as an opportunity to do some reforms, some long-awaited reforms, maybe of the functioning of the European energy market as well, but of the EU ETS, itself as well. So the revenues from the auctioning of EUA allowances should really be used to foster the green transition. There are many ways to do so, but we could see that in the second part of our presentation. There are the modernization and the innovation funds that should really help achieve or foster the energy transformation of our sectors, and especially for the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Slovakia, these are definitely to be used. So with these last words, I'd like to also comment on some follow-up and next steps. So as I said before, we will be really happy for your feedback as to what kind of topics you would like to see treated in the future. This regional workshop was organized, as I said, as part of the Live ETX project. And if possible, we'd like to organize a second webinar, maybe sometime in autumn or later of this year. Also, I'd like to mention that the EU ETS one-on-one document that I sent in one of the emails is to be translated to Czech very soon. So I will make sure to send the link to our Czech participants. And also, as another sort of comment towards our Hungarian colleagues and listeners and participants, there might be the same being done for Hungary. So if you think that you would feel the need for yourself, your organization, or for your partners to have this sort of comprehensive document that is very, very useful in providing some additional information about the EU ETS in your local language, in Hungarian, we'd be more than happy to be in touch with you. And if you reach out, we can also try to find ways to translate this very document to Hungarian. Lastly, we would really be grateful if you can fill in the post survey, which I will also be circulating as a follow-up and next steps for this regional workshop, because of course we'd like to hear from you if there's something you've learned, if in the future you'd like to hear us talk about other things, maybe in more depth, because as I said in the very beginning of the workshop, we really had to prioritize when choosing the topics of today's workshop. So that should be all from my side. Tomáš, if you have some concluding words, or Mr. Tuma, also please do now, or let's hear them maybe later this year in the next workshop, hopefully. Okay, so so I think yeah, this is it. As promised in the beginning of the workshop, I'll just do one screenshot. So if we have still some listeners, thank you, Isabella. Thank you, Susanna. If you could just put in your cameras for a bit, for those who would agree of being on the image of the screenshot, that would be very appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Zoltanatia, Katerina, Susanna. Thank you, everyone. Both of Susanna's. Yes, that's great.
All right.
Amazing.
Thank you, everybody, for making
So thank you
it.
so much for listening. Yes. Have a
And
nice
have
day,
a great
everyone,
day.
and hopefully see you sometime soon. Thank you. Have a good day.